I suspected my wife was planning a divorce, so I moved my assets. 2 weeks later, she filed, then backtracked when her plan backfired. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment when I first felt that something was off. It was a Tuesday evening in April. Maria, that's what I'll call her, was folding laundry on the couch while I was making dinner. Her phone buzzed. Nothing unusual there, except for the way she lunged for it, nearly knocking over the laundry basket. I remember glancing over, catching the flicker of panic in her eyes before she composed herself. "Everything okay?" I asked, stirring the pasta sauce. "Yeah, just work." Her voice was steady, but her fingers were gripping the phone too tightly. I didn't think much of it at the time. After 6 years together and 4 years of marriage, I trusted her completely. We were that couple, the one friends pointed to as relationship goals. We had our own language of inside jokes, spent weekends doing home improvement projects together, and could communicate volumes with just a look across a crowded room. Maria was my best friend, my partner, my future. Or so I thought. The changes were subtle at first. Maria began carrying her phone everywhere, to the bathroom, to the kitchen, even when just crossing the living room to grab something. Before, she'd leave it on the coffee table for hours, unbothered if I picked it up to check the time or take a photo. One evening, I joked about it. "What, are you running some secret spy ring now?" She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, work's been emailing me a lot." A few days later, she added a password to her phone. In 6 years, she had never locked her phone. "Why the password?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, you know," she said, not looking up, "there's been a lot of news about security breaches. Just being careful." I nodded and dropped it, not wanting to seem paranoid or controlling. But the knot in my stomach tightened. Then came the phone calls. Maria started taking calls in another room, stepping onto the porch or disappearing into our bedroom. This from the woman who used to happily chat with her mother on speakerphone while I was in the room. "Who was that?" I'd ask when she returned. "Just a friend from work," she'd say, the explanation becoming her standard response to everything. But the most telling sign was the way she positioned her phone. When we sat together at the dinner table, she'd place it face down beside her plate. One night, I reached across to pass her the salt and accidentally nudged her phone. The way she snatched it away, the flash of alarm in her eyes, sent a chill through me. Something was definitely wrong. It wasn't just about the phone. Maria became emotionally distant. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly now felt forced. When I brought up future plans, vacations, home renovations, even what to do for the weekend, her responses became vague and non-committal. "Where should we go for our anniversary this year?" I asked one morning over breakfast. We'd always planned special trips for our anniversaries, taking turns choosing the destination. She shrugged, eyes on her coffee. "I don't know. We'll figure it out. But it's only 3 months away. If we want to go somewhere nice, we should book soon." "Yeah, we'll see," she said, standing up abruptly. "I'm running late." This from the woman who once surprised me with a detailed itinerary for a weekend getaway, complete with restaurant reservations and hiking trails mapped out. Intimacy faded too. Not just sex, though that became increasingly rare, but the small moments of connection, the casual touches, the long conversations before sleep, the way she used to seek me out just to share something funny she'd seen online. I tried to talk to her about it one night. "Is everything okay between us? You seem, I don't know, distant lately." She looked annoyed. "I'm just tired. Work is stressful right now. Is there anything I can do to help?" "No, I just need some space." Space. That word hung between us like a wall. I nodded and retreated to my side of the bed, the chasm between us widening. The moment everything crystallized happened on an ordinary Wednesday. Maria mentioned she was meeting a friend for coffee after work. Nothing unusual, she did that occasionally. I happened to be running errands in the same area and thought I'd surprise her. Maybe we could walk home together, stop for ice cream on the way like we used to. When I pulled into the parking lot of the coffee shop, I spotted her immediately. She wasn't inside with a friend. She was standing outside, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. I stayed in my car, watching. Something about her body language, tense, guarded, made me hesitate. I rolled down my window slightly, not intending to eavesdrop, but curious. "It's almost ready," I heard her say. "I've got most of the account information." "No, he doesn't suspect anything." "Yes, I know how important timing is. I just need a little more time. I want to start fresh soon." My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't make sense of the entire conversation, but those fragments were enough to send alarm bells ringing through my head. When she returned home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen, trying to act normal despite the sick feeling in my stomach. "How was coffee with your friend?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Great," she said brightly. "Sarah's having problems with her boyfriend again. I swear, that guy is the worst." The lie slid off her tongue so easily that I almost doubted what I'd seen. But I knew what I'd heard. There was no coffee with Sarah. There was a phone call, a secretive, concerning phone call about accounts and fresh starts. I nodded and smiled, playing along. "That's too bad. Will they break up?" "Who knows," she said, opening the refrigerator. "Hey, what's for dinner?" And just like that, we moved on to mundane topics. But inside, my mind was racing. A few days later, Maria brought up something unexpected. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, half watching a movie, when she turned to me. "You know, I've been thinking," she said, her voice deliberately casual. "We should probably organize all our financial information in one place." I looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Just, you know, all our account details, passwords, important documents. It would be good to have everything together." "Why?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She shrugged. "I just think we should have everything in one place, you know, like all our account info, passwords, documents, that kind of thing, just in case of emergency." "What kind of emergencies?" Another shrug. "It's just smart, isn't it? What if something happens to one of us? Or what if we need to make a big financial decision quickly?" Her reasoning sounded logical on the surface, but something felt off. We'd been married for 4 years and had never discussed organizing our finances this way before. Why now? And why did it feel so rehearsed? "Yeah, I guess that's a good idea," I said, my mind connecting dots, the secretive phone calls, the overheard conversation about accounts, and now this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words in my head, trying to make sense of them. Was I being paranoid? Was this innocent financial planning or something more sinister? The question nagged at me for days. Then, while making a sandwich in the kitchen one afternoon, Maria brought it up again. "Have you thought more about organizing the bank stuff? Like, do you know where all the account details are?" I put down the knife and turned to face her. "Okay, what's going on? You've been bringing up the finances a lot lately. Is there something we need to talk about?" She looked startled, like a deer caught in headlights. "No, nothing's wrong," she said quickly. "I just think it's important, that's all, you know, for emergencies." "Emergencies like what?" I pressed. "I don't know, just life stuff," she said vaguely. "It's not a big deal, I promise. I just think it's something we should get on top of." Her evasiveness only intensified my suspicions. This wasn't casual financial planning. Something was very wrong. The next day, while Maria was at work, I decided to look into our finances. We had separate accounts for personal spending but a joint account for bills and shared expenses. When I logged into our joint account online, I found something concerning, a series of small withdrawals over the past month. Nothing huge, but consistent, methodical transfers that didn't align with our normal spending patterns. They weren't labeled for bills or groceries. In fact, they had no labels at all. I checked our credit card statements next. Maria had made several small purchases at stores we didn't typically frequent. Again, nothing outrageous, but unusual enough to make me wonder. The evidence was mounting, but I still didn't want to jump to conclusions. If I confronted her without being certain, I'd look paranoid and controlling. If my suspicions were right, I needed to be strategic. After much deliberation, I called Derek, a college friend who also happened to be a lawyer. I tried to explain the situation without sounding like I was losing my mind. "So basically," I said after laying out the evidence, "I'm worried she might be planning something. Am I overreacting?" Derek was silent for a moment. "Look," he finally said, "I'm not saying something is definitely going on, but you're not crazy for wanting to be prepared. If you're concerned about protecting your assets, now is the time to act. Better safe than sorry." "What exactly should I do?" I asked. "I can help you set up an asset protection plan. It's completely legal and would safeguard your finances if something happens." My stomach churned at the thought. Taking such drastic measures felt like acknowledging that my marriage was over. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation for Maria's behavior. But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The secret phone calls. The inquiries about our finances. The small withdrawals. The overheard conversation about starting fresh. "Okay," I said finally. Tell me what I need to do. That night, I sat alone at my desk, staring at my laptop. Maria was out, with friends from work, she'd said. My hands trembled as I opened our financial documents. This felt like betrayal. For years, I'd operated on complete trust with Maria. We'd built a life together, shared dreams, made plans. Now here I was, preparing to shield my assets from the woman I had promised to share everything with. But a persistent voice in my head reminded me, she betrayed you first. You're just protecting yourself. I thought back to our wedding day, Maria in her elegant white dress, tears in her eyes as she promised to love me forever. I remembered our honeymoon in Bali, how we'd watched the sunset from our private villa and talked about growing old together. I thought about the home we'd built, the countless evenings spent planning our future. Had it all been a lie? Or had something changed? When did my best friend become a stranger? With a heavy heart, I began compiling a list of everything I could transfer, savings accounts, investments, even our house. Derek had explained how to do it legally, creating an irrevocable trust in my mother's name. It wouldn't look suspicious if done correctly, and it would protect me from potentially losing everything. Feeling physically ill, I picked up the phone and called my mother. Mom, I need to ask you something important, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need your help with some financial matters. What's wrong? She asked immediately, concern in her voice. I couldn't bring myself to explain everything. I need you to hold on to some things for me for a while. It's nothing bad, just something I need to do to protect myself, just in case. There was a pause. Are you okay? The worry in her voice made my throat tighten. Yeah, I lied. It's just a precaution, nothing to worry about. She didn't press me. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need. After hanging up, I sat in the silent house, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and shame. I hated involving my mother in this mess, but her support gave me the strength to continue. By the time Maria returned home, I had already begun the process. Over the next few days, I methodically transferred my assets, our investments, and even the house into the trust in my mother's name, keeping just enough in our joint account to avoid raising suspicions. Maria didn't notice anything. She came home, kissed my cheek, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I smiled and agreed, the weight of my secret heavy on my chest. Part of me felt terrible, as if I had betrayed her trust, but another part felt relieved, as if I was finally taking control of a situation that had spiraled beyond my grasp. For the next 3 days, I tried to maintain our normal routine. I didn't want to give any indication that something had changed. Strangely, Maria seemed cheerful, almost unusually so. Rather than reassuring me, her sudden good mood only deepened my suspicion. If she was plotting something, she was doing an excellent job of hiding it. What stood out, though, was that she never mentioned the finances again. After pushing the subject twice, she suddenly dropped it completely. It was as if the topic had vanished from her memory. At first, I thought maybe I had overreacted and she had abandoned the subject because it wasn't important. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was avoiding it, almost as if she was afraid to bring it up again after I had pressed her. I caught her watching me several times, studying me as if gauging my mood or trying to decide whether to say something. Each time our eyes met, she would quickly look away, returning her attention to her phone or the TV. It was subtle, but unmistakable. It felt like she was waiting for me to bring up the subject, as if she didn't want to push the issue again. The silence made me even more anxious. It wasn't like Maria to drop something she considered important, and her sudden avoidance of the topic seemed calculated. If she was testing the waters, she wasn't diving in. If she was waiting for something, I wasn't about to give her the green light. Whatever her next move was, I knew I had to stay one step ahead. Something was coming, but I didn't know when or how. All I could do was prepare. That night, I made sure everything was secure, reviewing the paperwork once more and confirming with my mother that she had all the necessary documents. 2 weeks passed, and everything seemed normal, too normal, in fact. Maria was acting more loving, initiating conversations about mundane things like dinner plans or TV shows. It threw me off balance. After months of distance and secretiveness, her sudden warmth felt calculated. Part of me began to doubt myself. Had I misinterpreted everything? Was her strange behavior just stress or something I didn't understand? Then, one random Friday night, it happened. We had just finished dinner when Maria turned off the TV and sat down across from me on the couch. "We need to talk," she said, her voice eerily calm. My stomach dropped instantly. Despite anticipating this moment, the reality of it hit me like a physical blow. "I think we should get a divorce," she continued, her tone so matter-of-fact that it felt rehearsed. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Even though I had suspected it was coming, hearing the words out loud was devastating. "I need space to figure out who I am," she went on. "I feel like I've lost my identity in this marriage." Standard breakup phrases that explain nothing. But then she shifted tone. "You know, I've made a lot of sacrifices for you over the years, and I don't think you really appreciate them. I deserve more." That stung. It wasn't just that she wanted out, she was framing it as if I owed her something, as if I was the villain in our story. As I sat there processing her words, she added something that made everything click into place. "A friend of mine has been helping me see things more clearly," she said, not meeting my eyes. "A friend?" I remained silent, letting her talk, but my mind was racing. Who was this friend who had such influence over my marriage? The way she said it wasn't casual. It sounded like someone had been coaching her, convincing her that leaving me wasn't just an option but a strategy she needed to execute. And the more she talked about deserving more because of her sacrifices, the more skeptical I became. What sacrifices? I had worked hard to give her the life she wanted. When she asked to move closer to her job 2 years ago, I agreed, even though it meant a longer commute for me. When she wanted to attend an expensive yoga retreat last year, I made sure we budgeted for it, even skipping a vacation I had been looking forward to. I supported her through 2 career changes, reassuring her that it was okay to take risks because I wanted her to be happy. I had always tried to be a good husband, putting her first whenever possible. I remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and random things she mentioned loving. When she said she felt stuck in a rut, I suggested date nights. I listened to her complain about her job, friends, and family. I didn't always get it right, but I tried. That's why her "I deserve more" line hurt so deeply. I wasn't buying it. She wasn't upset because of anything I did or didn't do. She was upset because something, or someone, had changed her perspective. But I didn't push back in the moment. Instead, I nodded and said something non-committal like, "If that's how you feel, I guess we should figure out the next steps." She seemed surprised by my calm response, clearly expecting an argument or pleas to reconsider. But I was beyond that now. My focus had shifted. I needed to know who or what was behind her sudden, calculated change in behavior. She slept in the guest room that night, and on Monday, I received the divorce papers. They were aggressive, not just seeking to end our marriage, but to take everything, half the house, my savings, my assets, the car. She even included vague spousal support clauses that made little sense given her high salary. It was as if she expected me to hand over everything I had worked for without question. At first, I thought she was just being vindictive, but the specific, aggressive nature of her demands convinced me that she was being guided by someone who knew what they were doing. Since I couldn't directly ask who she'd been talking to, I had to be creative. I started with her social media. She hadn't blocked me, and although she didn't post often, I combed through her tagged photos and comments, looking for someone new. That's when I noticed a pattern. A guy named Jake had been consistently liking and commenting on her posts, nothing overtly inappropriate, but enough to make me pause. His profile was public, so I clicked on it. At first glance, he appeared to be just another 30-something marketing professional. But as I scrolled down, I spotted something telling, a photo taken at the same cafe where I'd seen Maria weeks before, posted on the exact day I overheard her talking about starting fresh. My stomach churned as I continued scrolling. More subtle clues emerged, a comment on one of her photos that read "You've got this," and a selfie he'd taken from what looked like her new apartment. None of it was concrete evidence, but it was enough to fuel my suspicion. I needed to know more, but I had to be careful. I decided to reach out to Lisa, one of our mutual friends. She and Maria had been close for years, so if anyone knew what was going on, it would be her. I kept the conversation casual at first, asking if she'd talked to Maria recently or if anything seemed off. Lisa responded quickly, claiming she knew nothing about any friend or any issues. When I asked a few more probing questions, she abruptly cut off the conversation, saying she couldn't help me. The whole exchange felt rushed, as if she was desperate to avoid getting involved. Not willing to give up, I called another friend, Emily. I followed the same approach, saying I was just trying to make sense of things. Emily was hesitant initially, giving vague answers to my questions. When I pressed a bit more, she quickly ended the call, leaving me even more suspicious than before. I sat there frustrated, trying to figure out my next move. Then, to my surprise, Emily called back. "Look," she said in a hushed voice, "I need to make sure this doesn't come back to me." I assured her it wouldn't, and after a long pause, she revealed what she knew. Apparently, Maria had been spending a lot of time with a guy named Jake from her workplace. Emily claimed she didn't know much else, but from what she'd heard, Jake was heavily involved in the divorce advice Maria was receiving. Hearing that name felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. It was clear now that this was more than just Maria's desire for space or self-discovery. Someone else was in the picture, directing her decisions, and I was determined to find out why. I decided to handle it my own way. That Saturday, I drove to her apartment building and parked a block away, hoping to confirm what I already suspected. After a few hours, Maria and a man I assumed was Jake emerged from the building. They weren't holding hands or anything overtly romantic, but the way they walked together, close, leaning in to talk, told me everything I needed to know. They got into his car and drove away, leaving me sitting there staring at the spot where they had been. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to at that point. It was clear that Maria hadn't simply fallen out of love with me. She'd been orchestrating her exit with someone else, and now everything made sense: the sudden distance, the financial inquiries, the aggressive demands in the divorce papers. She wasn't just leaving me, she was trying to leave me with nothing, and she had a partner in crime the entire time. I drove home that night, my head spinning with everything I'd learned. The betrayal burned, but what hurt the most was how premeditated it all was. She was using our divorce as a stepping stone to whatever life she was building with Jake, but she had no idea what I had in store for her. The first mediation session was tense from the moment we walked in. Maria's lawyer arrived with a binder so thick it looked like they were bringing a case against a Fortune 500 company. He began listing her demands as if they were perfectly reasonable: half the house, the money, my assets, the car, and even some nonsense about spousal support. I sat quietly, pretending to listen, but I was waiting for my lawyer to make his move. When it was finally our turn, my attorney handed a stack of papers across the table and said calmly, "Before we proceed, I think it's important for everyone to review these." Maria's lawyer took the papers and began skimming through them. His confident posture quickly deflated as he flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with each one. "What is this?" he asked, looking at my lawyer. "These documents show the transfer of all major assets into a trust under my client's mother's name," my lawyer explained. "The transfers were completed several weeks before the divorce filing, and the trust is fully legal and irrevocable." The room fell completely silent. Her lawyer turned to her, confusion and frustration evident on his face. "You didn't mention this," he said flatly. Maria snatched the papers from his hands and frantically flipped through them, her face flushing. "This can't be real," she said, staring at the notarized signatures and dates. Then she turned to me, her expression shifting from disbelief to rage. "You planned this," she hissed, looking at me as if I'd committed a terrible crime. "You knew I was going to file, and you set this up to screw me over." I didn't respond. I just sat there and let her connect the dots on her own. Her lawyer, visibly agitated, asked my counsel to elaborate, so he did, slowly, deliberately, and with all the evidence necessary to make the transfers irrefutable. The dates aligned perfectly, showing I had transferred everything well before she filed. The signatures were properly notarized, and the trust was solid. There was nothing they could do to challenge it. Maria was furious. "You're unbelievable," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "I can't believe you'd do something like this to me." I still didn't say anything. What was there to say? This wasn't about me doing anything to her. This was about protecting myself because she had made it clear she wasn't going quietly. The session ended with her lawyer mumbling something about needing to reconsider their strategy, but everyone in the room knew they had no more moves to make. When we walked out of the building, Maria pulled me aside in the hallway, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low. "You're going to regret this." I just looked at her and said, "I already regret trusting you. That's the only regret I have." Things escalated faster than I had anticipated. Following the mediation session, Maria went into full meltdown mode. It started with the calls, endless calls. At first, she seemed calm, even remorseful, leaving voicemails that began with "I think we just need to talk" or "I know this got messy, but we can fix it." When I didn't answer, the tone changed. By the second day, her messages alternated between sobbing and screaming. One voicemail would be her lamenting about making a mistake and not wanting to lose what we had built together. Then she'd launch into an angry tirade, accusing me of being cheap and cruel, blaming me for everything wrong in her life. I ignored it all. My lawyer advised me not to engage, and honestly, I didn't want to. I was done playing her games, but she wasn't. When the calls and texts didn't work, she began spreading stories. Mutual friends informed me that she had been telling people that the divorce was a prank, that it was all part of a larger joke. As if anyone would believe that. The holes in her story quickly became apparent. Friends began asking questions like, if it was a prank, why did you file actual legal paperwork? Or why hire a lawyer and make such specific demands if it wasn't serious? When people didn't immediately buy the prank explanation, she doubled down. She claimed it wasn't a joke, but rather a test of our relationship's strength. She started casting herself as the victim, saying that my reaction had hurt and betrayed her, that I had gone too far and broken the trust in our marriage. At first, some people seemed to believe her stories. I'd get strange messages or comments from acquaintances like, "Wow, I didn't realize things were so hard for her." Even her brother lashed out, saying, "You should have just talked it out instead of being so drastic." It was frustrating, but I knew the truth would eventually come out, and it did, thanks to a mutual friend, Matt. Matt and I weren't particularly close, but we'd always been cordial. A few weeks after the mediation, he messaged me unexpectedly, saying he had something I needed to see. When we met, he pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages between Maria and Jake. "How did you even get these?" I asked, scanning through the messages. Matt explained that he and Jake shared a mutual friend who had observed their conversations. Apparently, this common friend had grown concerned about the direction things were taking, especially when Jake began boasting about how he was helping Maria secure her future. It didn't take long for that mutual friend to figure out what securing her future really meant, trying to bleed me dry. Feeling guilty about staying silent, the friend had taken screenshots of the texts and sent them to Matt, believing he had a better relationship with me and could warn me. "This guy's been playing both sides," Matt said, shaking his head. "He's been hyping her up to take you for everything while making her believe he'd be there for her afterward." The texts were damning. Maria wasn't just venting to Jake about the divorce, she was actively planning her next steps with him, and he was guiding her through them. One message from her read, "Once the settlement's done, we'll have everything we need. I just need him to agree to the terms." Jake's response, "Don't back down. Make him feel guilty if you have to. He owes you. We'll start fresh once you've got the money." I sat there staring at Matt's phone, trying to process what I was reading. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an emotional response to a failed marriage. This was cold, calculated manipulation, one she had been developing with Jake behind the scenes. The texts quickly circulated among our mutual friends. Matt shared them with a few people, and they spread rapidly. Maria's credibility instantly evaporated. People who had previously been neutral or even supportive of her began distancing themselves. The change was almost immediate. Even her closest allies started backing away. By the time the divorce was finalized, she was left with only her personal belongings. Her lawyer quietly withdrew her complaint after recognizing there was no legal basis to stand on. All of those bold demands had crumbled under the weight of the documentation I had produced, and the trust I had established with my mother was unbreakable. Jake seemed to vanish as soon as things started to unravel. I wouldn't be surprised if he had used her as much as she had used me. From what I could tell, he had been feeding her fantasies of independence and a fresh start, but the moment it became clear she wasn't walking away with anything, he was gone. Without Jake in her corner, Maria's confidence collapsed. The calls and texts continued, but they became increasingly desperate. She was no longer accusing me, she was begging, "Can we just talk? Please. I'll do anything to fix this." One voicemail contained a different tone, "You don't have to forgive me, but can't we just settle this and move on? I'll drop everything if you just talk to me." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The damage was too deep to repair. Even her family began drifting away. Her brother contacted me at one point, apologizing for some of the things he had said earlier when he believed her version of events. "I didn't know what she was doing to you," he said. "I'm sorry I ever took her word for it. As for me, I kept the house, my savings, and something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace of mind. My mother, as always, was my rock. She came over with buckets of paint and a list of ideas to help me reclaim the space as my own. This is your fresh start," she said as we painted over the living room walls. "Make it yours again." And I did. I rearranged furniture, replaced old photos with new art, and slowly rebuilt my life without Maria. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the silence felt deafening, when I'd reach across the bed only to find empty space. But gradually, the pain subsided. I started reconnecting with old friends, taking up hobbies I had abandoned, and focusing on my career. I even began dating again, cautiously, still carrying the scars of betrayal but determined not to let them define me. Now, a year later, life finally feels like my own again. No more second-guessing every small interaction, no more feeling betrayed. Just peace. Maria is a chapter from my past that I no longer read, and the rest of the story is entirely up to me to write.